People share their unexplained stories of being in a place that shouldn't exist. Now I want T-Rex pancakes. My family has a cabin in Cook's Forest, Clarion, Pennsylvania. The cabin was built by my great-granddad and has expanded a bit over the years. It has a nice little nook at the bottom of a long dirt road off the main path down a nearby hill. There are a few other properties around, but most are up and off on the dirt road. Only one is down the hill and only halfway down at that. It's not modern by any means. No internet, cell service. The TV still has dials you have to twist to get to watch a DVD. It's very rustic and I love it. The property halfway down the hill is visible from the front of our cabin, which is where the kitchen window, parking, porch, and fire pit are. For as long as anyone can remember, it's been this abandoned lot that had what was once a cabin with a concrete basement. The cabin was built on a hill so half the basement stuck out, but the remaining part was crumbling. It also was at the fork where we would ride our ATVs to get to the fire break, so even though it's creepy it was a very common and familiar sight. One Memorial Day, which is when we opened the cabin after the winter, our family went to the cabin for the long weekend to spend time together. Everyone would usually get there in the early evening, and then all come together for my great-granddad's dinosaur pancakes for breakfast. So, I wake up, expecting to smell pancakes and hear chatter from the older members of my family down in the kitchen, but nothing. I assume I've gotten up too early and go downstairs to use the bathroom and then go back to sleep. Looking back, the whole upstairs was just mattresses with an aisle between them. I should have noticed that most beds were empty. I get downstairs and see all the adults outside, and I go out to say good morning and demand my T-Rex pancakes. I walk out and see all my family adults in a kind of semicircle facing an older man and a woman I didn't recognize. I assume this is some adult situation, so I go back inside to wake up my cousins, but not before looking at the clock on the microwave and seeing that it's about 3 p.m. Now, I love the cabin. I doodled the cabin itself, four-wheelers, and the area around it for months leading up to Memorial Day weekend. I was usually up at dawn because I was so excited to just be there. Sleeping until 3 p.m. was not in any way normal. I wake my cousins up and by the time they all mosey downstairs the adults are all back inside. Everyone is silent, but then great-grandpa fires up the stove and gets us kids excited for Dino cakes, so all seems normal. I was there with one of my aunts and my uncle, no parents, and my aunt is close in age to me and was for sure the cool aunt. So when I saw her pale as a sheet I went to ask what's wrong. She took me outside and pointed at the abandoned and crumbling property. In its place was a sprawling cabin mansion, parking area full of SUVs and the coolest looking four-wheelers my 13-year-old self had ever seen. Aunt tells me that the owners had come to say hi, the couple I saw earlier, and invited us over to hang out with their nieces and nephews, as they were having a Memorial Day get-together just like us. Me, having zero thought besides awesome four-wheelers, almost ran to the house but my aunt caught me and rather forcefully reminded me of my Dino cakes. I conceded and ran back inside to an atmosphere so thick with tension that even my undeveloped brain could detect it. The oldest of the adults were acting normal and playing around with us kids, but something was very off. I finally asked what was up, and my aunt bonked me on the head and asked if I had seen that massive cabin mansion last night, last year, the year before? We'd come to the cabin every few weeks until December. Did I see any construction? Well, no, but they invited us over and they have cool four-wheelers. Aunt Beth, come on. A resounding no from multiple family members made my emotional girl self almost flee and cry, until my grampy, a 6 feet 7 inches hulk of a man, got down to my level and explained that he felt there was something weird going on. He said the couple didn't act right. I assumed that meant they were rude, and that we should just keep to ourselves this weekend. I agreed and we went about our day, all adults keeping us occupied with activities either inside or behind the cabin. We get ready for bed when I see my great-granddad, World War II vet, who had the only bedroom on the first floor loading 3 shotguns, handing one off to my grampy and the other to my uncle/cool aunt's husband. To my shock and awe, my granny pulls out a Glock from her purse. I go to bed with images of my little granny taking down a bunch of bad guys with her shiny pistol. I wake up the next day to the smell of pancakes and the sound of adults chatting downstairs. I'm sad because today is when we have to pack and leave, but things seem back to normal so I'm very glad. I run downstairs, note that the clock says 7:30, but ignore the weirdness and sit in front of a plate of Dino cakes that I dig into, while asking my aunt what time we have to leave. Leave? We don't leave until tomorrow. Wait, what day is it? It's Saturday, we just got here last night. I notice just a bit of doubt in my aunt's eyes that I know something is up, and I run outside. The abandoned lot is back to its decrepit state. I resolve to brush it off and enjoy my ATV riding and forget about everything pretty quickly. It wasn't until I got back to school and was called to the main office where they asked why I wasn't at school on Monday. I told them that today was Monday. What are they talking about? Nope, it's Tuesday, and my absence was unexplained despite several calls to my parents. Know your horror movie tropes, it could save your life. Driving in rural areas in New England, near the borders of Vermont and Mass, so I am not sure which one I was in. It was late. Well, okay, so late it was early, and there was fog, dense fog, like Silent Hill levels of fog. And like the guy who dies in the opening scene of a horror movie, I am driving on back roads. First my headlight just up and goes out, cannot use high beams because of fog. I am in the middle of nowhere, I haven't seen a house or town in a long time. Car starts making noise, check engine light comes on. So I pull over, nothing much around, field and fog and dark. I gamely look at the engine, I can fix electronics, not engines. I tighten all the things I know. Car now won't start. So, I am in the dark, in the middle of nowhere, on the side of the road. Because of the natural rules of how things work, my cell phone has no service as well. It is like one big cliche. But I am not dumb enough to go wandering the roads right now. So, I recline my seat and decide to take a nap for a couple hours until the sun comes up. I wake up, the sun is coming up, the fog is going away. And I am on the main street of a tiny town, parked in front of what looks like the Bates Motel house. Houses everywhere. It was the creepiest feeling. I was sure I was off in the woods. There was not a light on in any house all night. There was a service station 50 yards up the road. I walked up to it, talked to the guy, who looked perfectly normal. He walked over to look at the car, asked me to try to start it. And it did. Turned over right away. And both headlights were working. I drove on, never got the name of the little village, and I couldn't find it on a map. I always felt like I was in this big setup for a horror movie that just didn't pan out. Maybe he did get raptured, my good friend, and I decided to take a trip up to the north shore of Mass one spring and arrived to our motel late, around 11 p.m. We were both all keyed up from driving for 8 hours and too much caffeine, so as soon as we checked in, we left the motel to find the closest beach. We found a little town beach a few towns over and put our bare feet in the ocean, took a walk on the shoreline, took a bunch of pics, and just goofed around. The streets surrounding the shoreline were residential and all oddly still and quiet. As we were hanging at the beach for about an hour, we noticed this thick fog rolling in. The beach had those older streetlights with yellowish/orangish bulbs, and it created this eerie effect. Everything had a kind of otherworldly golden glow. At that point we started noticing what a weird visual effect the fog was having and started taking pics to capture it. The fog was so thick that with the camera flash we could see these seemingly huge drops of mist/water vapor hanging in the air. The fog was insulating, and our voices seemed to carry only a foot or two before being absorbed by the mist. Suddenly we see blue and red flashing lights, which were startlingly close before we noticed them. We got freaked out and started running back to our car and just took off. Although the beach was closed after dark, we probably wouldn't have gotten in any trouble, but our adrenaline was already kind of pumping because of the surroundings. So, then we are on the road. Of course no cops are following us or anything, but we just want to get back to the motel at this point. It was supposed to be like a 10-12 minute drive away. We are joking around about how weird the night has been and following the GPS when suddenly, we realized that we were driving on an interchange we had just driven. I remember that the GPS said we were supposed to follow signs for 1N. So, we take the exit and stop talking and pay more attention to our surroundings. The fog is so thick that we can barely see 30 feet in front of us. We take the exit for 1N, take a few turns as directed by the GPS, and suddenly we are back on a highway or highway exchange again. The same exact one we had just been on 4 to 5 minutes earlier. The same sign pointing out the exit for 1N sat in front of us. We flip on our flashers and slow down to about 15 miles per hour and take the same exit once again. A minute or two later, we both realize that the route we are driving is the same one we just drove a few minutes ago. At this point we are both having major creepy deja vu. There doesn't seem to be any other cars on the roads at all. All the businesses we pass are closed. Houses are mostly dark with no signs of life inside. The whole world is cast in this weird thick orange air. We are completely freaked out. I didn't mention that this was the night when the rapture was predicted to occur on May 21, 2011. So, we drove around a bunch more, trying to find an alternate route back to the hotel. I swear we went through the same on-ramp/off-ramp we had earlier 2 or 3 more times. Somehow, we made it back to the motel, approaching from the opposite direction we should have, at 3:30 a.m. We had gotten lost for 3 hours in this string of identical, small, sleepy towns on the coastline north of Boston. Either that, or we crossed into a parallel universe for a few hours and eventually seamlessly resurfaced in our usual reality. That's pretty much what it felt like. It's one of those memories I'll never forget. I still look at the pictures we took that night every once in a while and reminisce. This guy drove through a David Lynch film. I was relocating across Texas and, as I normally do, was driving through the night to skip traffic, and because it's more serene that way. I was driving straight through central Texas going northwest, so seeing the hill country change to desert in the full moon was super cool. Anyways, I was driving with my, now ex-wife, and we were running low on gas. Luckily, we were pulling into a tiny no-name town, and we could see an old gas station come around the bend. This encounter happened at about 2 a.m. Now, this town only has one road, and this station was right at the edge of town at the end of it. When I say old, I mean very old, the type that you have no option of prepaying. You simply flip up the handle on the machine and you hear the pump inside start struggling to get the gas from the reservoir. It had the old style tick readers too, not a thing electrical on it. I, being the young man I was, had never seen one before, so I walked into the store to buy the gas before I pumped. The store only had one light in the far back on, and I almost thought it was closed since it was barely brighter inside than it was out in the moonlight. Upon entering, I saw the place was deserted, no customers, no workers, nothing. However, there was an odd tune playing on someone's radio that I couldn't place. An old sounding, upbeat piano piece was playing somewhere around the corner inside, and I heard shuffling once I walked closer to the source. This place made me feel scared. Not the whoa this is creepy scared, but the all hairs are on end. Something is seriously wrong here, but I can't figure it out scared. As I turned the corner, I saw a young man standing next to a large radio and dancing. His dancing, though, was extremely off-putting and seriously didn't match the tune at all. Though the radio was cranking out what's sounding like ragtime, this guy was running his hands up and down his body and pretty much feeling himself with his eyes closed in what looked like bliss. He was going far slower than the music and wasn't on tempo. For some reason, I couldn't speak. I couldn't even move. I was in a trance as every part of me screamed to turn and leave. Finally, I said, "Excuse me, I just need some gas." The guy kept dancing. I said it a little louder, and he finally slowed down a bit and opened his eyes and focused on me. But it was like he was looking at a finely cooked steak. He was looking almost through me, and silently walked to the register, not saying anything. I said, just $20 please. He, again, didn't say anything and just stood behind the ancient register, so I just figured maybe he didn't speak the language or was embarrassed I caught him dancing. So I laid the money on the counter and went outside hoping he'd turn on the pump. I filled up, told my wife about the weird scene in there, and turned off the pump to kill the horrible grinding noise from the interior pump fighting against gravity to get the gas up. Weird thing is, when we were leaving, I looked back in the window and the guy was still standing there behind the counter. This may sound fine, but my money was still on the counter in front of him. It was like he was a robot who just turned off once I left. This is where it gets super weird. A couple months later, I was driving back to San Antonio to visit family, and we figured we'd stop at that old gas station to see it in the daytime since it had become somewhat of a running joke between us. We pulled into this tiny town, and the thing was gone. The lot it sat on at the end of the road wasn't even there. It was just grass. No rubble, no old pump, no lighting, nothing. It was like somebody picked it up and moved it. It looked like nothing had been there for years. Still get freaked out thinking about it. Just so much milk. When I was about 12, my mom and I were traveling cross-country to move. We were staying the night in Missouri, at a typical roadside hotel next to a chain diner, so we went in for dinner. It was packed, despite us being one of only a couple guests at the hotel, so we sat up at the bar. We noticed something weird after a few seconds. Every single person had a glass of milk in front of them. Even the dudes around the bar. Nothing else, just a tall glass of milk. Someone opened the fridge under the center bar and we saw just gallons of milk. The bartender took our dinner orders and bought each of us a glass of milk without us asking for anything to drink. It was so weird. My mom told me not to drink it. On our way back to our room, my mom stopped at the front desk and asked the woman working there, half jokingly and half concerned, why everyone drinks so much milk in this town. The woman said she had no idea what she was talking about, and we just moved on. When we were putting our leftovers in the mini fridge up in our room, there were like 10 mini cartons of milk. No brand, just the word milk in black lettering. It was a weird place and I've never been able to figure it out. Gas stations are a hotbed for paranormal activity. A few years ago, I was driving home from Florida to Pennsylvania with 3 of my friends. It was late, probably sometime between 1 to 3 a.m., and we were somewhere in North Carolina. We needed gas soon, so we agreed to take the next exit off the highway that had a gas station. The second I took the exit, it was pitch black. There were no street lights along the exit ramp or on the roads up ahead. The only lights in the area came from my headlights and the lights from 95 behind us. The sheer darkness was enough to creep me out, especially because my vision isn't the best to begin with but really sucks when it's dark. But we really needed gas, so we pressed on. While driving to the gas station, the only building we saw was a massive, old-looking church. We drove by a sign informing us that we were in a town, but there were no businesses or houses other than the church. When we finally got to the gas station, we saw an assortment of giant farm animal statues outside the building, standing tall and barely illuminated. They weren't fenced off, and there were no signs explaining why they were there, so if it's considered an attraction, it's a confusing one at best. However, the weirdest thing happened inside the gas station. With me on this trip was one other girl and 2 guys. We had all been friends for years and our dynamic includes making fun of each other a lot, but never deliberately messing with each other's heads. At this point in our trip, we were all tired and eager to get home. The gas station itself was huge on the inside, filled to the brim with shelves, all of which were jam-packed with an assortment of junk food and junk items. In hindsight, this seems weird given how empty the town was, but at the time we were all distracted by just how much stuff this gas station held. The other girl and I went to the restroom while the 2 guys paid for gas. The restroom was hard to get to as there were boxes piled just outside the door, and the sign just had a piece of paper with women scrawled across it in green highlighter. Upon leaving the restroom, we saw one of our friends entering the men's restroom, also marked by a piece of paper with men written in highlighter. He gave us a weird look as he entered, but we shrugged it off and walked towards our other friend who we could see standing at a shelf a bit away. He was facing away from us, and as we approached, I started to get a bad feeling in my stomach. As we got closer, He turned and gave us the most sinister look I've ever seen. Alarm bells are going off in my head at this point, and my female friend and I proceed to the car, unsure of what to make of the interaction we just had. The second we stepped outside and looked towards the gas pumps, we saw the same two friends we had just seen standing behind us. The one who was entering the bathroom was leaning casually against the car, while the one who gave us a sinister look was finishing up pumping gas. My female friend and I were dumbfounded and asked them how they were standing in front of us when they were both just behind us a few seconds ago, and they looked at us like we had multiple heads. After paying for gas, the two immediately went back out to the car, as the gas station gave off too weird of a vibe to wait in there for us. Sufficiently creeped out, we piled back in the car and noped out of there. I'm not sure why we saw two of my friend's doppelgangers in a gas station, or why the doppelganger seemed to be in such a bad mood, and I'm not sure why the gas station had a collection of farm animal statues outside of it. I'm pretty content never going there again though, that place should not exist. I did promise a milkshake, so back when I was younger, I was kind of a terrible kid. To deal with being just totally unmanageable as well as being a child of two narcissists, the decision was made that I would work on a huge ranch deep in the sticks of Arizona. Should be noted I was a pretty accomplished equestrian rider at this time, so ranching wasn't really out of the realm of what I could do. On cattle drives it was not unusual to stumble upon houses, encampments, and even whole towns, and also in the middle of nowhere. These all had their own movie-like situations that came out of them, but one I will never forget. Here we are on another cattle drive, this time pretty far into it. We have been out in the desert, if I remember correctly, easily 3 or more weeks when we stumble upon this town in the middle of a canyon that is picture perfect in addition. Lo and behold, there is a diner. Like an old totally chromed out East Coast diner. We have not eaten anything really of substance for a while, and the head wrangler promised me a milkshake for my birthday. I was beyond stoked, if not a little weirded out, but honestly, after you spend enough time in the wilderness of the US, nothing really surprises you. So, we leave behind some of our mates to watch the cattle who are resting in the shade after getting over this rocky wash, and hike into the canyon to go to the diner. The second we set foot in the diner, the head guy, this older cowboy who is the head of all of us, grabs my arm. This place is packed, and everyone is wearing odd clothing like stuff from maybe the 40s or 50s. My head wrangler, T, is a tough guy who from ranching for his entire life had seen some weird stuff. T grabs my arm, as I am just focused on milkshake and about to go grab a booth, when I realize everyone is just staring at us and there is a really strange feeling in the air. Now we were used to getting looks all the time from being smelly and dirty, but these people had these almost fear and or shock. T and the two others with us slowly back out of the diner, dragging me in tow, and we immediately go back to our site and leave without a word. I was so confused I just went along with all of it. To this day I have no idea what that place was or if we stumbled through a time warp or what, but my wrangler told me later that night when we were away from them that he felt like we had stepped back in time. Like truly stepped back in time, and the place was stuck in some sort of loop, and if we stayed, we would get stuck too. T never really spoke a lot, nor was he to be messed with. He also had a mean sweet tooth despite having almost no teeth, so for him to have reacted that way really shook me. I have no idea if what he told me is true, but I will never forget the look of all those people in that immaculate diner. The Spooky Cave. By my hometown there was a hiking trail that people went to very infrequently. It was along the side of the Niagara Escarpment, so it had some climbable cliffs and some very shallow caves that you could crawl around on. I went with some friends when I was 19-20, and we were crawling around and found a cave that went deep. We had never been in there or seen it before. So, we pushed forward and decided to check it out even though we had no flashlights, and this was when cell phones didn't really have a flashlight function. We stepped into the cave, and it was easily 20 to 30 degrees cooler than outside. Upon looking around with which light we had, we noticed it was clean inside the cave, as in it didn't have beer cans littered everywhere like all the other small caves did. While in there we got an eerie feeling after being in there shortly. Hearing weird and strange things, feeling like we were being touched, poked, and pulled, and not having any way to figure out who was doing it because it was too dark. We were just using lighters to see what was around us. We were convinced one of us was messing with the others, although anytime we sparked up a lighter, we were all decently far apart. We decided to hightail it out of there after only a few minutes, convinced to come back with flashlights. We came out to see that it was now dusk outside. When we entered it was midday. Somehow, we had lost roughly 3 hours inside of this cave. We went back with flashlights the next week, but have never been able to find this cave again.